Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was on mopping duty because I was the newest hire, and because I did not complain when the manager assigned the work that nobody wanted. The store was quiet the way it always was after 9 at night in our town, with the main aisle smelling like lemon cleaner and the bakery case humming. I had a plastic caution sign at each end of the wet area, and a blue rolling bucket with a press wringer that squeaked every time I used it. The entrance doors were locked to new customers at 9:30, but we always kept them set to exit only until closing, which was 10. The security shutters were up in their housings above the glass. The night crew had already moved a pallet of bottled water to the end cap by the soda because of a sale. I remember small details like that because they felt normal at the time. I was 17 and a stock clerk with a name tag that said Evan. I listened to the store radio clipped on my belt. It whispered something about a last-minute price check and then went quiet. It was a normal shift until it was not. The Sirens started at 9:52, which I know because I looked at the time clock by habit. In our town, we knew the difference between the test tone and a real activation. This one was steady for a long interval, paused, then repeated. It sounded like the outdoor warning siren that the county used for weather, but the clear sky outside the front windows did not match that. A clerk at self-checkout glanced up with an expression that said he was thinking the same thing. The manager on duty, Dana, looked out from the service desk, then down at the phone. She picked up the receiver to call our district emergency line. The store radio popped with the voice of our security camera monitor in the back room, asking if anyone else was seeing this. None of us knew what this was yet. The tones on the ceiling speakers shifted to the 3 chimes we heard only for official announcements. The emergency alert system message came through the cable feed we kept on mute in the break room and forced itself onto the store televisions that were playing a loop about loyalty points. The screen went to a black background with white block text. The voice said, clearly and slowly, this was a civil emergency message. Shelter in place. Avoid travel. Avoid contact with individuals who appear ill or disoriented. Follow instructions from local authorities. It listed our county by name and several neighboring counties. It said cellular service might be limited. It said to stay inside if you were already under a roof. The part about contact with individuals sounded strange until later. Dana looked at me and said to get the mop bucket off the floor and put the caution signs away. Her tone was calm and clipped the way she used when someone slipped and we needed to control the situation. She said she was closing the front, and she said it like she was talking to herself to keep the steps in order. She walked to the alarm panel between the entry and the carts, used her key, and started the lockdown sequence. We had practiced that for storms and vandalism threats, but never for anything like this. The rolling shutters above the glass doors whirred, then dropped as a single wide sheet of aluminum slats. They made a sound like a zipper the size of a truck. The customers near the front stepped back. A few moved closer, then away again when they realized the doors were closing and not opening. The first thing you learn in retail at night is that people handle fear in different ways. Some want to stand near a counter and talk with a person in a vest. Some want to grab their receipts and head to a car. Some argue with whoever is closest. A man in a ball cap at lane 4 told us he had to leave because he had a dog in the truck. A woman with a baby in a carrier asked if the pharmacy was still open. A high school teacher I recognized from my homeroom asked if the sirens meant a chemical spill. He said he had heard about railroad cars in other states and used a lot of words quickly. Dana told everyone to stay calm and that we were following the county directive to shelter. She used her customer service with authority voice. We took people away from the windows and into the center of the store, where falling glass would not be a risk if anything hit the front. My radio crackled again. Luis, from Frozen Foods, said the lights were flickering back by the ice cream. I looked up at the rows of LEDs. They were bright, but I noticed the soft dip in return. That means the utility is under strain. The bakery ovens had already been shut down at 9. The compressors for the walk-in cooler kicked on, then off, then on, like they were clearing their throat. I went to the break room to check the television that showed the county channel. The text at the bottom repeated the instruction to stay inside and avoid contact with anyone exhibiting severe confusion or aggressive behavior. The phrase was strange in a supermarket context, but the wording was precise enough that it did not feel like a rumor. Cell service went from slow to nothing. It happened in less than a minute. People held their phones up and watched the bars vanish. The store's landline worked for another few minutes. Dana got through to District Loss Prevention and said we were following shelter procedures. They told her to lock all external doors, including the receiving bay and both fire exits, but not to block them in a way that would stop emergency egress from the inside. That is the kind of phrase that sticks with you after safety training. I went with our cart associate, Riley, to the back to check the receiving area. We pulled the chain hoist to drop the steel overhead door to the dock. We set the manual lock bar. We checked the side door with the panic bar and pushed the metal wedge into place so it would not swing open with a draft. The first injured person hit the fire door by aisle 12 hard enough to set off the local alarm. It was a metal-on-metal thud, followed by the bleeding chirp of the door sensor that we all knew from accidental pushes. I jogged down that aisle with my radio pressed to my shoulder. 2 customers were already there. An off-duty paramedic named Marcus, who I recognized from when he bought protein shakes after his shifts, and an older woman from the church who always used paper checks and smiled a lot. The paramedic had his hands out and said to move people back. The injured man shoved the panic bar again and the door gave. He came inside with a half fall, like he had leaned on it with all he had left. He had a long cut on his calf with fabric and dust stuck in it. It looked like he had broken glass on it or scraped it on something sharp. He was breathing hard and talking too fast, saying that a crowd outside the convenience store up the road had turned into a rush and that he had been pushed into a parking stop and down. He said others were behind him. Behind him was a second figure who did not talk. The second figure moved like his body had forgotten how to step evenly. He looked at us the way you look at light when you stand up too fast, with a glazed focus on the nearest living thing. The paramedic put himself between that person and the others and told me to pull the door. I pulled, and the door's metal edge slammed into the frame. We threw the lock, which would keep it shut from outside. The second figure hit the outside panic bar and rattled it. More hands hit the door after that. The door was steel, but it felt thin right then. Dana arrived and saw the injured man. Her training kicked in. She told Marcus to triage. She told me to get the first aid kit from the service desk and bring the plastic face shields too. She told Riley to pull a line of carts across the aisle to create a barrier because people were gathering and would try to get close. We did what she said because that was how we had been trained for storms and even for shoplifting incidents. We did it because doing something structured makes people calmer. The injured man sat on an upside-down milk crate. Marcus washed the cut with bottled saline from the kit. He wore nitrile gloves that came out of a plastic dispenser we kept for minor injuries behind the desk. He asked the man his name and if he had any allergies and if he was up to date on tetanus. The man said his name was Aaron and that he worked over at the machine shop near the hardware store. He kept trying to sit up and look toward the door as if something out there had followed him. Marcus covered the cut with gauze and wrapped it with a roll of elastic bandage. He said it looked like a laceration from glass or a metal edge, not like an animal bite. I heard him say that because everyone was thinking about that phrase from the television. The figure outside pounded on the door again. Then another set of hands hit near the top. We heard voices but not words. It sounded like wind chimes without the chime part, the sound of a throat pushing air without coordination. I do not use dramatic language. I am trying to say that it did not sound like asking for help, and it did not sound like any language. The customers closest to the aisle backed up until their heels hit the side stacks of paper towels. The baby in the carrier started crying. The older woman from church touched my shoulder and asked if this was a drill. I told her no. The power dipped and came back, then dipped again. When the lights returned the second time, half the overhead stayed dark because the emergency circuits had taken over. The store ran on 2 arrays, one for full utility power and one for backed-up circuits that kept the refrigeration, select lighting, and the point-of-sale servers alive if we lost the grid. We did not often talk about it, but I had listened on orientation day. In the back lot, a diesel generator the size of a minivan sat behind a chain-link fence with a lock. When the automatic transfer switch sensed that the voltage and frequency from the utility had fallen out of range, it disconnected the building from the grid and spun the generator up. We heard it start as a low, distant rumble. It was not loud, but I felt it in my feet through the floor. Emergency lighting came on in the aisles. It was enough for us to see straight lines, but not enough to make people feel safe. The cases along the perimeter stayed bright because the refrigeration lines were fed by the backed-up circuits. The produce misters misted once, then stopped. The public address system still worked, and Dana used it to tell everyone to come to the center of the store where we had more light. She gave simple instructions about water, restrooms, and staying together. She did not promise anything because she did not know anything to promise. At the front, the shutters were down. I checked the glass through the small gaps where the slats met. The parking lot, lit by poles, looked like it always did except for a few cars in odd angles, as if their drivers had left in a hurry. A couple of people were at the glass, looking in with their hands cupped against the slats. I raised my hands to show them I saw them. They pushed at the shutter and yelled that they needed inside, but even if I had a key, the procedure was clear. Do not open exterior points if a civil shelter in place is active and you cannot control who enters. That sentence was in my head because of our store manual. When you are 17, you hide behind the rules because they were written by adults. It felt wrong, but it felt safer. I brought cases of water from the end cap to the seating area up front where we sometimes served coffee in the morning. I set a case on each table and handed out cups. The older woman from church helped me pour. The paramedic kept an eye on Aaron, who looked pale and said he felt cold. He asked for his phone. There was no signal. He gave up on it. A woman in scrubs came up and said she was a nurse at the clinic. Her name was Tasha. She introduced herself to Marcus with the speed of people who had worked in emergencies before. Between them, they built a small station on a checkout belt with gauze, tape, the store's small supply of over-the-counter pain medicine, and the blood pressure cuff from the pharmacy screening station. They moved in straight lines and said clear things to each other. That helped me breathe slower. Luis came from Frozen with a pallet jack. He said we should use pallets of water and soft drinks to reinforce the inside of the fire doors. It was not something we were supposed to do in regular times because you cannot block emergency exits. These were not regular times. Dana agreed. We lined pallets along the inner corner of each fire door aisle, not directly in front of the doors, but at a 90-degree angle so the doors could still swing out if we needed to leave. Then we set rows of metal shopping carts handle to handle, rolled them tight, and linked the child seat areas together with plastic zip ties from the back room. When you look at a cart, you do not think of it as a barrier, but a row of them becomes a wall that gives you time. We put displays of canned goods behind the carts because canned goods are heavy and stack like bricks. Riley found the stretch wrap rolls we used to secure pallets. We wrapped 2 carts at a time around their frames to make them act like a single unit. We did not block any path completely because we still needed lanes for the customers and because if a fire ever started, we needed to get out. It was a balance between 2 rules. We used clear wrap so staff and customers could see each other. People watched us and it gave them something to focus on. I heard someone say that it looked like a set of flood barriers. That was not a bad comparison. The group began to sort itself with no formal plan. People sat near the center between health and beauty and the cereal aisle. The teacher tried to start a list of names on a clipboard and asked people to sign in. At first, it felt sensible. After a few minutes, it felt like a classroom exercise that did not match the situation. People did not want to write their addresses on a sheet when they could not call home. Dana stepped in and said we would do a verbal head count instead. She had me count and report through the radio. I walked aisle by aisle. I counted 32 customers, 2 infants, and 9 staff. Marcus and Tasha asked if anyone had medical training. A retired firefighter raised his hand. He said his name was Bill. He knew where every fire extinguisher cabinet was because he had inspected them once for a fundraiser. He mentioned oily rags and electrical panels, and I saw Dana trust him because he used the right words in the right order. The pounding at the fire door by aisle 12 built into a pattern. It would stop, then start again a minute later, like whoever was outside remembered the door at regular intervals. It was not loud enough to drown out the public address announcements or the low talk of the customers, but it moved the air in the aisle when it hit, which meant it was heavy and close. We heard voices outside from time to time. They were not asking for help. I will not describe them more than that. I do not want to put something into words that other people cannot get out of their heads later. At about 10:15, the generator faltered. The lights did not go out, but they dimmed. The transfer switch clicked. Luis and I went to the rear electrical room with Donna. She unlocked the gray metal door with a key from the ring she wore on a coil bracelet. Inside the room, the hum from the switchgear was steady. The diesel smell was stronger. The generator control panel showed a low fuel warning light. The last truck from the vendor had filled the tank 2 weeks ago, which would normally be enough to ride through minor outages for refrigeration only. Running the sales floor lights and the point-of-sale servers would drain it faster. Dana opened the binder on the wall. It listed optional load-shedding steps. We followed it. We turned off half the overheads and non-essential plugs, left the refrigeration and emergency lights, and kept the point-of-sale servers because the scanning system also tracked our inventory and controlled the doors. It was not about money. The system also held the codes for door locks, and we wanted those alive. Back on the floor, people had stopped trying their phones and were sharing chargers out of habit even though nothing charged. Marcus and Tasha rotated among the group and checked for anyone with conditions that needed medication. The pharmacy counter was closed, but we had the key. Dana opened it after she and Tasha went through the protocol that required a written log of anything used, names, doses, and a signature. It felt right to write things down even if the power could go again. They found an inhaler for a child with asthma and handed it to his mother with careful instructions. They set aside insulin for a woman who identified herself and knew her dose. Everything was measured and recorded. That order made me feel better than the light did. Aaron, the man with the leg injury, shivered even under a store blanket. Tasha checked his temperature with a disposable strip thermometer. It showed a low-grade fever, which could happen with a cut and stress. He said he felt pressure in his head and a ringing in his ears. Tasha listened to his chest with a stethoscope from the clinic kit that she kept in her car. She said his lungs sounded clear. She asked him when he ate last. He said he had stopped at the convenience store to get a sandwich, and that was where the crowd had been. He said people had acted like they were all late to the same appointment, and that it had not made sense. He closed his eyes and said he did not want to think about it. Marcus told him to drink water and focus on his breath. We heard movement in the stockroom. It sounded like a box falling off a shelf, then another. I took a flashlight and went with Bill, the retired firefighter. We passed the cardboard baler and the compactors, both quiet because Dana had thrown the lock out. The back room is rows of steel racks with product waiting for the overnight stocking crew. You can get lost in there if you are new. I knew the row markers. We found a cat that some of the night shift fed near the dumpster. It had gotten inside early in the evening when the dock was open for the bread vendor. It hissed and darted behind a pallet of pet food. We closed the inner door to the dock to keep it from running out to the sales floor and getting someone scratched. It was a small thing, but it reminded me that not everything moving in the building was a problem. Dana gathered staff and a few volunteers by the customer service desk. She laid out a simple plan. We would keep everyone in the center, keep the aisles clear of blockages except where we had placed carts by the exits, rotate bathroom access with an escort so people did not wander alone, and keep the back doors monitored with teams of 2. We would check the shutter controls every 15 minutes to make sure the system had not timed out, even though it should not. We would keep people informed every 30 minutes on the public address, even if we had nothing new to say. I remember those numbers because they gave us rhythm. I took the first back door watch with Bill. We stood 12 feet inside the fire door to aisle 12 behind the row of carts. The metal of the door vibrated with each new push from the other side, but the lock held. The carts creaked when the door hit them through the gap. The sound was a reminder without being a crisis. I held the radio and kept my breathing steady. Bill stood with his hands on the handle of a metal broom like it was a staff. He had me look at the wall map of the store exits so I knew the path to the dock in the dark if the lights failed. He pointed out the fire extinguisher and said it was multi-purpose dry chemical and could stop electrical if needed, but to aim low and sweep. He said that in a calm tone. I repeated each piece back to him because that is what you do when someone trained gives you directions. At about 10:40, a white pickup truck rolled into the far side of the lot. Its headlights swung across the slats of the shutter. It stopped in a way that said the driver was choosing the position, not sliding into it. The driver opened his door and stood in the light. He cupped his hands and shouted to let him in. The slats muted his voice. Dana came to the front with me. She used the intercom near the door that fed the outside speaker we used to call curbside orders. She spoke into it and said we were under a shelter order and could not open the door. The man said he was a deputy from the next county and showed a badge, but it was upside down, and it might have been a wallet. He said he could keep us safe if we let him in. He glanced behind him twice at the lot the way people do when they are nervous. Dana did not open the shutter. She asked him to put the badge against the glass of the shutter and hold it. He banged on the slats with the badge instead. 2 shapes moved at the far corner of the lot. The man looked, then looked back, and then ran to his truck and pulled away fast. People watched him go through the slats. No one said anything. Some of the customers began talking about leaving through the back because they had relatives nearby and wanted to check on them. They asked if they could take a cart of water and some canned goods. They said they would pay. Dana said she understood the feeling, but the instruction was to shelter in place, and the danger outside was not something we understood. She said the best way to help family was to keep ourselves stable, so emergency services did not have to divert to help us. That sentence sounded like something a manager would say, but she meant it. She looked tired and kept her voice level because we were all watching her. The temperature in the store dropped a few degrees because the generator was feeding the refrigeration and the air handlers were still moving air. People near the front wrapped themselves in the light throw blankets we sold by the seasonal aisle. Donna wrote down the barcode numbers and set a note that said the items were issued to shelter occupants. It was a small act of order in a night without order. A teenage girl from my school sat cross-legged near the greeting cards, holding the baby so her mother could use the restroom. She looked at me, and I looked back, and it felt like we were at a class assembly that had been moved into the wrong building. I told her where the baby formula was and which brand the store had marked as sensitive stomach and the difference in scoop size. That was something helpful that did not require a key. At 11, the sirens stopped. The quiet was heavier than the sound had been. When a noise stops after a long time, your ears hunt for what is missing and fill in things that are not there. I heard the low constant of the generator and the occasional thud at the fire door and the shuffle of people adjusting their positions. I did not hear emergency vehicles. I did not hear any helicopters. I did not hear any cars passing by on Main Street outside, which is unusual even at night. The town was not asleep. It was paused. The public address message from the county returned, shorter this time. It repeated the instruction to remain sheltered and said responders were moving from area to area to stabilize. It did not give a time frame. It did not say what the hazard was. It said to avoid contact with anyone showing signs of severe confusion, sudden aggression, or lack of response to verbal commands, and to avoid physical contact. It said to secure doors and to remain in place until contacted by authorities. The nurse and the paramedic looked at each other at the phrase about physical contact. They did not say anything, but they both adjusted how close they stood to people while still being kind. A little after 11:15, the pressure on the fire door changed. It went from single hits to a sustained push like more than one person had leaned in. The metal creaked. The carts moved a few inches. The zip ties stretched and held. The door itself did not open because the panic bar still needed to be pushed inward, but the sheet flexed. I told Bill, and he told me to radio Donna. She came with Luis and Riley. We added another layer of carts and tied them. We moved an entire pallet of canned tomatoes with the pallet jack and set it behind the carts. Canned tomatoes are heavy and stacked tight. The combined weight made us feel like the door had a backstop. We built similar supports at the other fire door and by the dock inner door, even though those were quiet. Trust issues began like a draft through a crack. A man in a flannel jacket pointed at Aaron, the injured man, and asked how sure we were that his cut was not a bite. He did not shout. He asked it in a way that landed in the center of the group because everyone had been thinking it and not saying it. Marcus answered and said he had cleaned the cut and it was a straight line with even edges. He said it looked like glass, not teeth. He said he would keep watching. The man nodded, but the thought stayed. I saw it in how people shifted themselves a few inches farther from Aaron, then tried to look like they had not moved. Aaron saw it too and looked at his own leg like it belonged to someone else. A woman with a toddler had a different question that was harder. She asked what we would do if someone showed signs inside. She did not say the word that everyone was avoiding. She asked it like someone who had to plan, because if you have a child, you plan. Dana answered in a straightforward way. She said that anyone who became sick would be moved to the pharmacy area where there were closed doors and easy access to supplies, and that medical staff would monitor them. She said we would protect everyone's safety and dignity. She said we would not act on rumor or fear. She asked people not to crowd anyone or to point at them if they coughed or shivered. The room relaxed a fraction. The generator warning light flickered again. We needed to reduce load more if we wanted it to run through the night. Dana made another hard call. She told maintenance to shut down all non-essential refrigeration cases. That meant closing the doors on the beer and wine coolers and turning off the open cases in the deli that were empty at night anyway. We kept the walk-ins and the dairy because some of those items were medicines for people tonight, not products. The store grew dimmer and colder and quieter. Around 11:45, Marcus asked for help moving Aaron. He said Aaron's fever had climbed, and he was starting to lose track of where he was. He was not aggressive. He was confused and tried to stand when he should not. We moved him to the counseling room next to the pharmacy where there was a door with a window. He could see out, and we could see in. We gave him water and crackers because his hands shook and he said the crackers made him feel normal. Tasha spoke to him in a calm voice. She told him where he was and that we were safe inside and that we were waiting for morning. She said it the way you tell a patient on a long night that the sun still follows the schedule. I took a turn on roof check. There's a metal ladder in the back corner of the stockroom that goes up through a hatch to the roof. We use it if the HVAC vendor needs access. Dana opened it with a round key, and I climbed with Bill behind me because ladder rules say you do not climb alone. The night air was cool, and the town was quiet in a way I had never seen it. From the roof, you can see the water tower with the town name on it and the blinking radio tower on the hill beyond. The radio tower's light was dark. The water tower sat silent. Main Street had cars at odd angles. One streetlight flickered. I heard a noise like many people breathing a little too hard and then silence again. It came from the direction of the strip of small stores near the highway. I did not stay out long. We did not try to signal anyone. The orders were to shelter. We needed to get back to the people inside. When we climbed down, Dana was waiting at the base of the ladder. She looked up at me with a question that was also a request to tell her something steady. I told her what I saw and added that I had not seen emergency lights. She nodded and said thank you like I had done something useful. Sometimes the thing you do that helps is noticing the exact shape of a problem and saying it out loud. Close to midnight, we heard a sound I had never heard in the store. The front-end scanners all beeped at once. Not because someone had scanned something, but because the point-of-sale server had restarted and pushed a test tone. It was not supposed to do that except during maintenance, and it meant the server had lost power briefly. The overhead went dark and then returned to the emergency level. The generator cough came a second later, and then steadied. Luis checked the generator panel again and came back with a look that said we were on a clock we could not see. Dana told him to shut down the bakery proofers, the deli slicers, and anything else that might be drawing standby power. We stood in the aisles and looked up at the lights as if we could add minutes by staring. A man with a denim jacket walked up to me and said he and two others were going to try the back alley to their cars. He said he respected the shelter order, but he had a family member who had not answered their phone. He did not look like a reckless person. He looked like someone who had made a choice and was informing me. I told Dana. She came and spoke to him. She did not raise her voice. She told him that opening any door would compromise everyone inside and would draw attention. She said if he opened the dock, the generator light and sound would spill out and pull whoever was outside to us. He looked at the door and then at his shoes. He stood there a long time. He did not go. Sometime after midnight, the animal sounds outside turned into a pattern. It was not a language, but it was coordinated. It moved like slow water along the building from the front to the side door and then to the dock. We heard hands along the metal. The metal made a different sound when more weight was on it. If you've ever heard hail on a roof, you know how patterns can feel like a map. Luis stood by the dock inner door with a metal pry bar under one hand and his other hand resting on the handle of the pallet jack. He did not move. He waited while the door frame thrummed. In the pharmacy room, Aaron tried to stand. He put his hand on the wall and said he needed air. Tasha put a chair under him and told him to breathe through his nose. He said he was hot. She checked his temperature again. It had climbed. She looked at Marcus and then at Dana. No one said the word they were thinking. Tasha said she would like to give him acetaminophen from the shelf and some water, and Dana logged it because even now we were writing things down. Aaron drank and closed his eyes. The teenager from my school asked me a question that I was not ready for. She asked me if I thought this was one night or if it was the start of something huge. I told her that our instruction was to shelter until contacted and that I did not have any different information. She nodded and said okay. She was not asking for a prediction. She was asking for honesty. I gave her the honest part that I could. That felt important. At 1 a.m, the cat from the stockroom walked out onto the sales floor like it owned the place. It threaded itself between people and stopped at the base of a seasonal display where there were fleece throws. It curled and slept. The baby in the carrier breathed in a steady way that babies do when they finally give up a fight against sleep. Those two quiet things carried more weight than the banging at the door. They were reminders that not every system had failed. At 1:15, the back alley motion sensor tripped on the camera by the dock door. It sent an alert to the monitor that we had propped on the service desk. The old black and white picture showed a row of shadows at the base of the overhead door. They were close and pressed together. The overhead door flexed inward a few inches. The lock bar held. The chain on the inside rattled. Luis looked at me, then at the pallet jack, then at the pallet of bottled water nearby. We slid the pallet into the path between the inner door and the sales floor and set the jack under it with the handle up and the brake on. It was a barrier and also a tool, because if we needed to move it fast, the handle was already there. A customer who said he had a General Mobile radio service license offered to scan for any open channels on a handheld radio he kept in his truck bag. The shutters blocked some signals, but radios sometimes work indoors when phones do not. He stepped near the glass of the freezer cases because they can reflect and bounce signals, which he said sometimes helps. He found a local weather broadcast with the standard voice, repeating the civil message with minor differences. He did not find any live two-way traffic from authorities. He did pick up voices of other people who were sheltering. They were in a store across town and in a gas station near the highway. We could hear fear in their voices and also the same practical talk about food and doors and batteries. We did not try to transmit. We did not want to make our location louder than it already was. Around 1:40, someone shouted by the front. Dana hurried there. A figure had pressed its face against the shutter slats and then slid away. It came back and did it again. It was not trying to see, it was pressing. The slats held. The figure left streaks on the metal. The older woman from church whispered a prayer under her breath that was mostly a list of names with the word "keep" in it. She did not try to make anyone else say it. She did it for herself. At 2, Tasha asked for help moving Aaron again. He was sweating and working hard to breathe. She listened to his chest again and frowned. She said she heard some congestion now. She asked if he had any history of asthma. He shook his head. Marcus asked Dana if the store had a portable oxygen cylinder and any of the first aid kits. We did not. The store was not a clinic. Tasha sat close to Aaron and coached him to slow his breath. She dampened a washcloth with cool water and set it on his forehead. She kept her hands where he could see them so he would not startle. She was careful to avoid direct skin-to-skin contact beyond what was needed. The man in the flannel jacket asked, again without anger, what our threshold was for moving someone out of the group area if they became sick. Dana said we had already made a space in pharmacy and we would use it as needed, which we were. He nodded. He was not satisfied, and he was not wrong to ask. People want to know where the lines are, not because they want to cross them, but because they want to know where to stand. At 2:30, the generator changed pitch. I had learned through the night that a small change in sound meant a system response, not necessarily a failure. This time, the transfer switch clicked and some of the emergency lights went off. The refrigeration stayed on. The public address stayed on. The scanners went dark. We were past retail and into shelter mode now. Dana announced that we were conserving power to make it to sunrise. She said we would be quieter and dimmer and that we would still be here. Simple words matter when larger ones have no effect. A little after 2:45, we heard glass break. It was outside, at the far corner of the building near the pharmacy drive-up window. The shutter covered the main entry glass, but the pharmacy's service window had a smaller metal roll-down that we had also shut. The glass behind it had broken, which meant someone had thrown something or fallen into it, and that now there were sharp edges inside the shutter. We checked the interior counter and found small flakes that had shaken loose through gaps. We swept them up carefully so no one would cut a hand if they leaned there. We taped a piece of cardboard over the sill as a visual reminder. It was a small act and a long night. Between 3 and 4, time slowed. People slept in sitting positions with their backs against end caps. The older couple from the church took turns closing their eyes while the other watched. The retired firefighter walked the perimeter every 15 minutes without being asked. The GMRS guy listened to the Weather Channel in case the message changed. The teenager held the baby and whispered to him about the pets she had at home. I sat by the cleaning supplies with my radio turned down and my hands on my knees to keep them from shaking. Every now and then the building would pop the way big buildings do as they cool. Each pop made a few heads lift and then settle. Just after 4, the pattern outside changed again. The pressure at the dock door eased. The thuds at the fire door moved farther apart. It was not gone, it was less. I do not know if whoever was outside grew tired or got distracted or moved to another spot. I only know that the sound gave us a margin where there had been none. People who had been frozen in one position stood and stretched. The cat walked a small route between 3 people and accepted each hand like a guard making rounds. The baby snored for the first time. At 4:30, Aaron's fever broke. He stopped sweating hard and his breathing slowed. Tasha let out air she had been holding for an hour. She said his body was doing the work it needed to do. She said we should still watch him. She changed the gauze on his leg and noted that the edges looked clean and not infected. She wrote the time on the tape and the dose she had given him earlier. Marcus took his pulse and nodded. The man in flannel looked at the door to pharmacy and then away. He did not say anything. I do not know if he felt relieved or simply moved his worry to a different shelf. At 5, the generator faltered again. The refrigeration stayed up because the system prioritized it, but the emergency lighting dipped to the lowest setting and stayed there. The store was now a series of islands under each light, with shadows between. Dana called a short meeting with staff. She said sunrise would be close to 7 at this time of year. She said we needed to keep people calm for 2 more hours and make decisions after we could see outside. She said if the generator failed completely, we would move everyone to the center and use battery lanterns that maintenance kept for power outages. We had not used them yet because we did not want to draw attention to our presence after hours. Now, attention was not our problem. Time was. At 5:15, the man with the denim jacket approached again. He said his sister lived a mile away and that he could not sit still. Dana looked at him and then at the group. She said she would not stop anyone from leaving when it was light, but she would not open the doors while it was still dark. She said if anyone left after sunrise, They should go out the dock together in pairs and not try the front because the lot was too exposed. She said if anyone returned, they could only come back if they were alone and showed no signs of confusion or aggression and could answer questions clearly. People listened hard. They did not argue with those rules because the rules made the fear into steps. I took one more roof check with Bill as the eastern sky turned from black to a cold, deep blue. We opened the hatch slowly so it would not slam. The air had a clean bite in it that said early morning. The town lay still. Smoke rose from one place near the highway where something had burned in a small way, not a building, maybe a car. The radio tower on the hill blinked once and then off. I did not know if that meant a system had been rebooted or if it simply had enough stored power for a single flash. The water tower reflected the first gray light. 2 deer stood near the edge of the lot by the drainage ditch and looked at the building with their ears forward. I saw one person walking along the far sidewalk in a straight line the way someone walks who has not slept. I did not call out. The order was to remain sheltered. When we came down, Dana had everyone gathered near the front. She spoke on the public address with the tone of someone who has not slept and chooses every word. She said it was close to morning. She said we were going to maintain the shelter for now. She said we would let a small team check the dock alley once it was bright enough to see. She said if the alley was clear, we would put signs on the dock door for any responders who passed by. The signs would say we were sheltered and stable and had people who needed medical follow-up. She said we would not open the front. She said we would issue simple breakfast items, bottled water, and diapers as needed. She said we would stretch our supplies because we did not know how long we would be here. She said we would continue to act like a team. At 6, the first thin light reached the aisle ends through the high windows on the parent room hallway, the ones above the fire doors that do not open. Natural light has more information in it than electric light. It makes edges clear. People stood a little taller under it. The baby woke and smiled like babies do when they reset with sunrise. The cat did a full body stretch and then sat with its tail wrapped like a scarf. The retired firefighter cracked the door of the electrical room and listened to the generator. He came out and said we had less than an hour if the load did not change. That truth felt like a timer in the room. At 6:20, the motion at the dock camera returned. A single figure stood there, swaying slightly like someone who had stood too long. It was not pressed against the door. It was turned toward the alley the way a person looks up a street waiting for a rideshare. The figure was alone. We waited and watched. It did not knock. It did not leave. Dana said we would not open the door with a figure that close even in daylight. She said we would try the other fire door alley for a look at the lot instead, using the small glass near the top as a periscope. Bill and I went there. I climbed a small stepladder and looked through the narrow wire-reinforced glass at an angle. The lot was empty of cars in motion. A few doors hung open on parked vehicles. There was a streak on the asphalt near the front that looked like someone had dropped a soda, and it had dried. I did not see anyone moving in the lot at that moment. At 6:40, the emergency alert system interrupted the weather broadcast again. The voice sounded more formal. It said authorities were conducting neighborhood assessments and asked people to remain sheltered until contacted. It said responders would knock and identify themselves by agency and would know the shelter code phrase for the morning, which was 2 common words spoken in a set order. It did not say the words on the air. It said to ask for them. It said to call the emergency number only in life-threatening situations because cellular service was limited. It said to avoid contact with individuals who did not respond to voice command or who moved toward you in a straight line without stopping. It used careful words and did not say anything about time beyond remain sheltered until contacted. The man with the denim jacket stood and looked at the dock again. He nodded to himself as if he agreed with someone nobody else could see. He sat down. He did not push. I remembered that because it told me people were still able to choose stability even when they were scared. At about 6:50, the banging at the fire door by aisle 12 stopped. The quiet was so complete that I heard the compressor on the ice cream case cycle down. Quiet is not always good, but in this case, it meant the pressure at that point had moved away. Dana looked at Bill and then at me. She said we would open the interior hallway door by 12 inches for 20 seconds to listen. She said Bill would have the extinguisher and I would have the broom handle, and she would be at the door with the chain ready. We moved in positions the way you do when you practice something you never think you will need. We cracked the door. We heard wind and nothing else. We closed it and set the chain. That small test felt like opening a window in a safe way. At 7, light filled the high windows. The building was still. The generator coughed, wheezed, and then stopped. The emergency lights went dark. The refrigeration stayed on for a few seconds on stored energy from the units and then fell silent. The new silence was deep. People held their breath and then let it out. Dana said we would use the battery lanterns now and that we would move everyone to the center where the skylights gave a little natural light. We did it without rushing. It felt like moving into a circle after standing on the edge all night. For the next hour, we waited. We heard a single siren far away and then nothing. We heard crows on the roof pecking at something near the gutters. We heard 2 small knocks on the front shutter that did not sound like a person. We did not respond. We listened for the knock and the code phrase the broadcast had promised. We made coffee from the backup propane camp stove the store kept in the emergency kit for winter storms, the one a manager had bought after a bad ice season 3 years ago. Dana wrote down that we had used it and how many propane cylinders we had. The coffee mattered less for caffeine, and more because the smell said morning. At 8, someone knocked at the dock in a specific pattern. It was 3 short and 2 long, which is not a universal code, but it felt like a deliberate thing. Dana walked to the intercom and spoke through the closed door. The voice on the other side said the agency name and asked us to confirm the shelter phrase. Dana asked them to provide it. They did, 2 words in the right order. She did not repeat them. She asked them to step back from the door and to hold their identification up to the small security camera lens near the top. A laminated badge appeared, held steady with a photograph and the right county seal. The voice read a list of names of county officers that we could have known if we lived here long enough. Dana still did not open the door. She asked them how many would enter and whether anyone behind them was present. They said 2 only. She told them to wait while she moved the pallet. She looked at Bill. He looked at me. We moved the jack and the pallet to the side with quiet, careful motions. When Dana cracked the inner door, the 2 responders stepped in slowly with their hands open. They wore high-visibility jackets with reflective tape and paper masks. They kept a steady distance. They spoke in low, even tones. They said they were checking shelters and confirming status. They asked for a head count and noted our power situation and our supplies. They asked if we had anyone ill. Dana said we had one with a treated laceration and a resolved fever, but we wanted a second look, and a child with asthma who had used an inhaler once. The responders nodded. They did not try to approach fast. They asked permission to examine Aaron in place. Tasha and Marcus stayed with him while they did. They asked him a sequence of questions for orientation. He answered all of them clearly. They looked at his leg dressing and nodded when they saw the note with the time. They told us what they could. The civil emergency was active because of a sudden spread of a neurological condition. They said the word infectious without qualifiers, and then added that official language would come later. They said first responders had been instructed to avoid direct contact and to maintain distance. They said county crews were checking shelters and advising people to remain in place while plans were built for safe evacuation or continued stay. They said the most important things were to keep doors secured, to limit movement, to avoid bringing anyone new inside unless they were alone and oriented and not followed, and to avoid contact with individuals who could not be redirected by voice. They did not give a timetable. They said we were doing well. They asked if we had the ability to maintain sanitation. Dana said yes, for a time. They looked relieved at that. They left as steadily as they came. They said they would mark our location on their list and return with guidance. They gave Dana a paper with a phone number that might be reachable by text later when the towers were less congested. They reminded us of the code phrase, which would change each shift. They were not dramatic. They were professional in a way that told me they were holding their own fear in a steady grip. After they left, the room released a breath it did not know it had been holding. People did not cheer. That would have been out of place. They sat a little straighter and did things like tie their shoes and fold the blankets and help each other stand. The man with the denim jacket said he would wait for official guidance and that he was sorry he had pushed earlier. Donna told him he had done nothing wrong by asking. Aaron asked for another bottle of water and said his head felt better. The teenager handed the baby to his mother, who smiled in a way that said nothing was normal and also that one thing had gone right. We reorganized the room. We moved people into smaller groups and assigned each group a staff member or a volunteer as a point person, so no one felt like they were shouting into a crowd if they needed something. We set a schedule for the restrooms and taped arrows on the floor to mark a one-way path to reduce bumping into each other in the dark. We taped a note to the pharmacy door that said medical area, so we would not forget to keep it clear. We put a box by the front that said trash and another that said sharps, even though we hoped not to need it. The boxes were there for order more than for volume. I took another walk through the aisles with my radio, not because I expected to find anything new, but because moving helped me keep my mind steady. I noted that the cat had decided the pet food aisle was home base. I noted that the cereal aisle looked like a campsite. I noted that the greeting card rack had cards that said "Get well soon" and "Thinking of you," which felt like labels for the room. I did not pick any up. We were not pretending this was a holiday. We were holding position. By 9, sunlight through the skylights gave us enough light to walk without lanterns. The sound outside settled into a pattern of distant movement and occasional single knocks. The smell in the store shifted from battery and diesel to coffee and plastic and cool air. The refrigerator cases hummed, then paused, then hummed again, as if choosing whether to turn back on without their generator friend. They did not. We knew we would need to move items soon to prevent spoilage, but that was a concern for later in the day when we had more information. The county responders did not return in the next hour. They had a town to check. We understood that with our heads, even if our hearts wanted them back right then. We kept to our schedule. We cleaned a little. We checked in with each person and asked them to tell us if they felt dizzy or confused or too hot or too cold. We wrote down small things like Mrs. G asked for tea at 8:30 and child with asthma played with a soft toy for 10 minutes and laughed, because those notes created a record and because writing them kept our hands busy. From time to time, someone asked if the front shutters would come up now that it was day. Dana said no. She said they would not come up until there was a plan and enough presence outside to control the space. She said the shutters made it possible for us to be here at all. The man in flannel stood by the aisle end and watched the door with the look of someone who had told himself he would not touch a hot stove twice. He did not touch it. At 10, a new emergency alert system message came. It said the civil emergency remained in effect and that authorities would move shelter by shelter to establish controlled evacuation points as needed. It said not to self-evacuate because movement in the open could draw attention and create new hazards. It listed a number to text if you had specific medical needs. We tried to text it, and the message sat with a little spinning circle. That was a communication of its own. I stood by the service desk and looked out through the narrow gaps in the shutter slats at the lot again. It was the same lot I had walked through every shift, with the cart corral and the oil stains from delivery vans and the small landscaped islands with the same 2 bushes in each. Today, it was also the edge of our world. Inside, we had order that we built from procedures and tape and kindness. Outside, we had air and light, and a road that led somewhere we were not going yet. The difference between inside and outside had never mattered this much in my life. When I started this shift, I mopped floors and checked dates on milk and faced the soup so the labels looked neat. I did not have a plan for any of this. What we did have was training about doors and fire and first aid and how to talk to people when they were upset. We used all of that. We found new rules in the spaces between posted rules. We used cans and carts and tape in ways that were about people, not products. We leaned on the nurse and the paramedic and the retired firefighter and on each other. We asked questions we did not want to ask and gave answers we could stand behind. We waited for morning without pretending that waiting was easy. This is not a victory speech. It is a record of a night when we were trapped in a supermarket with the shutters down and the sirens in our ears and the doors shaking under hands we did not want to picture. We built a small shelter with grocery store parts and human parts. We kept our voices even. We watched each other for signs of fear and sickness and moved toward the ones who needed help. We did not open the door when it would have been easier in the short term. We kept the power alive as long as we could. We used daylight the way you use a tool. We held until someone with a badge and the right words knocked and said we were doing what we should. It was still going to be a long day. There would be decisions about food and water and bathrooms and sleep. There would be hard talks about who could go outside and why, and whether anyone should. There would be more knocks, some that came with code words and some that did not. There would be 4 more cans of coffee and 3 more boxes of diapers and a dozen more batteries and a roll of tape that suddenly mattered because it held a sign onto a wall. There would be a baby's cry and a cat's stretch and a man repeating a code phrase through a shutter. And in each of those ordinary pieces, there would be the work of keeping a small group of people in a small place on the good side of a line none of us had ever seen before last night. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.